afternoon and welcome to this week's episode of LevelUp Cyber Live. My name is Tony Bryan and I am your host. Very excited about today's discussion with our guest, Chris Miller. Chris is with ATB Technologies, and Chris and I have known each other for an incredibly long time. I think we're going on, 10, 11 years maybe, I think, in total.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
If not longer. Great friend, been in a couple different groups, but, very excited about what he's been doing at ATB for the last several years. And I imagine everybody else will be equally as enthused because they do really, really good work. So with that, welcome, Chris. And I'd love to just, tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So I've accidentally found myself in this tech space, right? So it was truly an accident. But I saw that there was opportunity and a career to be made. So I've been in the space now for over 15 years, focused on managed services, working with small, mid-sized clients, here in mainly the Midwest, with a heavy focus here in St. Louis. So, it's been an interesting journey. Tech changes all the time. I came in pretty cocky about it and realized I didn't know much about it. But over time, I've learned a lot. I've been through a lot. I've been in the trenches with a lot of our clients, and it's been amazing. But ATB, we're a managed services provider here in Chesterfield. We serve small, mid-sized clients. We're pretty selective in the clients that we work with, and we're very intentional in how we grow and work with our clients. There's a heavy focus on security, which everyone has to focus on these days. That's what we do.
Well, security, I think Microsoft has done it better than most, right? They've started, the security aspect, and I think it's a testament and a little bit of a rant where they've embedded the need of doing audits and cybersecurity stuff and all the things that they do. If you want to touch anything on Microsoft, you have to have a certain threshold of security achieved before they throw you in, which is smart, right? It helps protect all the other people. And I think the same is, is starting to pick up for managed service providers across the country. Like, great, we want to help you with IT, but you can't, it's the days of ignoring security or adding Okta or identity access management, just the very basics of, of kind of a cybersecurity posture. It has to come in. So, it's been interesting and I think cool to see organizations like ATB, traditional managed services that were hardware and device type of management, to continue to grow and add security best practices, tools, resources, and even stuff like SOC. So, it's exciting. So, I think that's a great segue into this, right? Like, I'm a small to mid-sized business, and I've spent a lot of time over the last couple of months just like looking at rural communities. I know we've talked, I think last time we had a show, EPA is changing rules for water treatment facilities, and, electric grids are getting more and more restrictions, so there's all these like new rules and things that are coming out, which can be overwhelming. What advice would you give to companies that are all of a sudden seeing all these new regulations starting to come out? Like, what advice would you share with them?
Yeah, so we're seeing it across the board. Even as an MSP, we're being put more in the spotlight. They're looking at service providers now whenever it comes to breaches and ransomware attacks. Federally, there's been some initiatives under the Biden administration, and then you're starting to see even some states start to pass cyber liability laws, and some of those are taking that risk from just the C-suite of the organization onto, kind of sharing that then down to managed services providers and providers of IT support. I think the biggest thing is for individuals to just stay abreast of what's going on. There's a lot of change. The space moves quick. There's always going to be a hole. We're trying to stay ahead of the bad actors, and that's always the hardest thing. A lot of the tools that are on the market, right? No matter if Microsoft has done a really good job with their M365, and they continue to expand. The security offering, they help you understand a secure score. So even if you don't have a managed service provider like us and you're a small organization, you can actually start to get tips and ideas on how to better protect your overall environment. So there's a lot of information out there. NIST is a national kind of guideline when it comes to cybersecurity, and so understanding what that is, it is not light reading, but there are some things around password, posture, and that are worth understanding as a small business.
Absolutely. So outside of just the abundance of new regulations, and I think just kind of piggyback on your point, NIST, HIPAA, PCI, pick your standards, right? Like that's, pick whatever specific one and lean into that, So I make widgets and I am in rural Arkansas. I'm making up states and businesses here. I've traditionally made things. I've got an IT person, who makes sure we hire somebody that they get computers and their Microsoft is set up. But like we've never really done anything with like security other than kind of have good passwords that aren't password.
Mm-hmm.
Where should I start? I know I'm seeing the news. There's all these things and risks. Like I don't really know where to begin. Where would you suggest that I would start in that scenario?
Yeah, so we get it a lot where organizations are still functioning the way they did 15 years ago, and then you could put antivirus on, and that was considered security and protection, and then it got maybe we're doing some spam filtering to filter out emails, but even that then gets more sophisticated, and so there's really a full approach that you have to do, and so it's enhancing those areas. And so now what used to be just antivirus is getting into the world of EDR, which is an endpoint detection and response. And so and then adding even a SOC beyond that, which is a security center that is actually looking at the data that comes in, making decisions in close to real time on what needs to happen. And so it gets more behavioral, and it's making sure that Joe at whatever manufacturing, they only run a single shift, and no one's working at 3 a.m, and all of a sudden someone's trying to access something at 3 a.m. Well, that should trigger a flag. That organization isn't paying for someone to sit there 24/7, but outsourcing and utilizing some type of SOC and even some of these tools allows that to be caught. MFA used to be considered, nice to have, or it was a nice term to throw around, but now it's a requirement. And I think the insurance companies are actually doing the best job at this. They're our best salespeople in reality, because they're requiring it for you to get cyber liability insurance. And that's a driver. That's a driver for a lot of these small businesses, to where, again, it used to be, hey, you've got antivirus and you have backups. Okay, great. Then we're going to get through this. Backups are still extremely important. But we do see ourselves even moving into, and some of this legislation is moving into SIM tools and even zero trust, which as a small business, there's a cost to it, number one. But secondly, it's a user experience. And so we constantly have to weigh security against what that user experience is. And at the end of the day, it's a business decision, and we're there to help support.
So you alluded to the I word, insurance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if anybody who's listening has actually gone out and shopped rates for cyber insurance, but it's frightening and it's overwhelming. And then there's a lot of questions asked, right? And the intent of any insurance policy, regardless of type of insurance, is to not pay a dime, right? So, the questionnaires and things that you answer can have some potential impact on if something happened, right? So, the
Absolutely.
best thing that I can think of is, let's say, I buy life insurance and say I don't smoke, and then I die of lung cancer, right? Like the likelihood of me getting paid out, or my family collecting on that life insurance policy is probably slim. And so the same would be said if I, say I have a 24/7 managed SOC and I don't, and a breach happens, there's a strong likelihood that, they're not going to pay out because I didn't necessarily tell the truth on the things that I have. So
Yep.
What advice would you give for companies, right? We're at a point now where it's not just a nice to have, it's becoming much more of a necessity. But there's still unknown uncertainty of it. But like, so what advice would you give to organizations that are exploring cyber insurance?
Yeah, so there's a lot out there when it comes to cyber insurance. There's a lot of different organizations. It used to be, hey, this is going to be a $2,000 add-on to your premium, and we're going to cover up to $1 million per occurrence. Now you're seeing, hey, you've got to fill out this long form that asks, is your data encrypted? And that may go into even more granular detail. Is that encrypted at rest? Is it encrypted in transit? Is it both local and in the cloud encrypted? And so organizations that don't have internal IT, sometimes they don't know, or they've heard, they're like, oh yeah, we used a tool and it should be encrypted, but they don't really know the repercussion of that. And so they get into situations, it's not if but when, with cyber, and they go to try to get paid out. Well, now they're decreasing it, or they're not paying out at all. MFA is one I see a lot where that's kind of a go no go right now with insurance providers, where you either have MFA and you have it across all accounts, or they're not going to cover. The flip side I've also seen is what used to be a $2,000 premium is now a $25,000 premium, and they're reducing what they're going to pay out. So if you don't have MFA in place, they're only going to pay you out at $75,000, which, when you think of a cyber breach and the people you have to notify and the PR and everything that you have to do, and maybe the recovery from that, $75,000 doesn't get you very far. I'd be making up the number, but I know it's somewhere, over like 300,000, 400,000 continues to creep up. The cost that a cyber attack has on an organization, and for some, it puts you out of business. So insurance is key, but what's most important is that you understand what you're filling out in that form. And not to plug, but that's what organizations like us and partners of managed services companies do for small, mid-sized businesses. We give you that team that understands what you're looking at. And frankly, we're taking on some of the risk alongside of you, which is something that managed service providers have to be cautious with too.
So I was teeing you up, right? So because I definitely want to make sure we cover phishing and ransomware, but to the point that you just alluded to, right? I still, it always comes back to me of like, where do I start? You know what I mean? Like, so there's all this information, and every CEO of a small business is getting hit up by software, managed services, right? And it can be overwhelming, especially if you're getting asked about things that you're not, you don't feel overly confident in, right? Like, and so it can be a lot. So, what's the one thing that you would advise every company that's out there to go out and do on auto, right? Like, it's at a minimum, nothing else happens. At least do this thing. And there's no such one thing, because there's probably 10 of each thing.
Right.
But there's one specific thing. What do you think that would be?
I think it's user training. At the end of the day, your users are your biggest risk. No matter what tools we put in place, they can mitigate that risk. They can, help. But at the end of the day, if your users don't understand why it's important that they don't click on, the UPS email that has an attachment, or why they shouldn't open this, or what that means to the organization, you're at a general risk. So user training, I think, is by far the number one thing that every organization needs to look at.
That's a solid piece of advice. So there's been an example that has kind of stuck with me over the years that I think, I think you guys do. ATB does a really good job with it, where there's this ability to take a crawl, walk, run phase, right? Like, if somebody comes in and they want the Cadillac, they want to get the insurance, the multi-factor, and all of the the RFID logins and all the stuff, right? Like, like the board all of a sudden and the CEOs and leadership are just like, oh my God, we can't afford this, right? And it comes down to there's a balance, right? There's X amount of risk and there's X amount of reward. And it comes down to what is that risk tolerance you're going to do. So that's where I really appreciate this idea of a crawl, walk, run, where you would engage with an organization like an ATP or a managed service provider, right? And determine a moment in time that this is where we're at. This is where we're accepting X amount of risk, and then we're mitigating, right, to some of that by leveraging that partner. And then you work alongside a great company like ATB, and they, for that first year or two, you start getting some systems in place, and budget gets better, and then you hire a person who liaises with, your partner, and eventually you take over that program on your own, and then you have for really big issues, you have, a contracted rate that you would bring somebody in to do it. Give us a good example of maybe of an organization that you've walked through, something similar to that, of where you've, kind of over time have built a really solid program that would serve that organization well.
Yeah. So, if I look back and think about, it's bigger than security, right? So there's a lot of organizations that we work with that come in fairly immature in regards to, how they utilize technology. So, but we've seen manufacturing firms doing everything via spreadsheets, helping them get to an ERP system, and then really laying the framework for what security around that looks beyond. And so everyone starts at a different place. Honestly, a lot of things that we come into, they've already understood what is to outsource, or they've tried it internally. Like, man, with this one person, he has to take vacation, and we can't put it all on him. We need assistance around him, and so we come in and we kind of fill the gaps around, which could be anything from, like you stated, it could be a project, it could be helping out with development from like an API connection. It could be helping dashboard with Power BI, or it could be just taking on that security piece of helping them find some of the holes. And so then that's conversations with the executive team and executive leadership to understand what their risk is. And this isn't a new concept. Backups, for example. Backups, you can go very basic and just have the data backed up. You can have it on a more regular basis. And so understanding what that threshold is of downtime, and then what the full recovery process is, and what that expectation is important, because you could spend, a couple $100 on some disks, or, an external drive, or you could spend multi-thousands of dollars per month on something that's going to give you a recovery, maybe not in real time, but near real time. And then there's even the real time situations where, that could be quite a spend. And so security is the same thing. We try to understand, okay, what's right now, what's needed. And so something, again, like MFA and user training, we know stops a lot of these pieces, alongside of an EDR. And so let's put those pieces in place, and then let's talk about what's next. Because SIM and Zero Trust, even though we're seeing a movement, we may still be a period of time before that's being pushed by insurance companies, and before that's being pushed through legislation. But SIM and Zero Trust totally change your end user experience. If they don't like MFA and having to, look at it, be it Duo or even Microsoft's Authenticator, whenever they log into stuff, they're going to hate Zero Trust. Because you're really locking down. You're not able to download without having it come to either internal IT or help desk to approve every piece of software. You're essentially taking away the admin rights from any local user, and so that becomes a lot more cumbersome, and it requires more manpower. And so organizations have to be really cautious and really think through, okay, are we ready for this? And am I willing to take the risk if I don't do this?
Man, sometimes finding that mute button is easy, and then other times it just a struggle with it. But all right, so so I've got two more topics I want to make sure we cover, and I'm always baffled at how crazy fast 30 minutes goes. But first and foremost, right? Like, so the biggest concern I think that keeps most people awake, and you alluded to a little bit earlier around just users being your kind of number one victim, right? I know I'm getting 10, 15 phishing emails or spear phishing, spearing emails in a week, right? You know, what should companies be doing proactively? I know obviously user engagement's there, but like, you know, that happens, and all of a sudden, like ransomware, like it happens. Like we get a compromise. You know, what advice do you give to a small to mid-sized company? You know, they have had a breach. They have had, you know, they're now locked down. You know, what advice are you guys providing for folks?
Yeah, so I mean, once a breach occurs, right? If you have cyber liability insurance, there are some specific guidelines that are laid out in there in regards to how much time you have to report that. You know, is it an issue? Is it a breach? And there's very specific verbiage that needs to be understood. And because that can translate into you being covered or not covered. A lot of times, cyber liability insurance providers, and we recommend it for all of our clients, they have some type of insurance policy for it. But that dictates a lot of times who they can utilize in response to a breach. And so even our team is trained that if it appears to be a breach or a potential breach, we need to be having that conversation right away with the leadership at the organization, or our main points of contact, and then getting insurance involved earlier rather than later, again, to not jeopardize the payout. Right. At the end of the day, cyber liability is going to help you with your PR. It's going to help you with your notifications, the requirements there. It's going to help bring in a strong, third party that is going to dissect everything that happened, understand it, and we're there to support all throughout that. But we don't want to be the ones that end up causing you not to be covered.
So do we pay or do we not pay? It's always the $1 million question, right? Is like, it happens, I know it's not a black and white answer, but what's the general rule of thumb?
So, I mean, typically, it shows time and time again that you could pay all day and still not get anything back. So that's a big risk. The city of Dallas, I think, actually, I was down there in February for a tech conference, and they were down for at least 3 days. They got hit by cyber, and on the news in the morning, I saw it, and they were talking about how the police were having to go to old school ways of communicating because communications were down. Ambulances. I mean, it became a serious issue within the city of Dallas. But in those situations, I don't want to be the one to say, hey, don't pay. Like if you're a hospital and you're down, I think that's a conversation again that you're going to have with insurance. But as a rule of thumb, I mean, if somebody robs me, I'm not going to turn around and pay them and expect to get whatever back. Like it's kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah, I mean, I've always heard that if the importance of backups, the contingency plans, and having that in place, which foot stomp, for folks that for partnering with an organization to help you, like doing rock drills, doing rehearsals, running through those things, having an intentional backup plan really is important because it does minimize if you have to pay or not have to pay. If you're at a point as an organization have nothing, right? You have no way to get any form of your data back to any moment of time, whether it be a week or a month. You might be stuck paying. And from everything I've always heard is that when you pay, then you're on this master hit list for all the bad people in the world, and then you're more susceptible in the road because now you're a known commodity because they know you pay. So getting in front of it's better.
You're right, Tony. I mean, backups are a key piece there, right? So if your last backup was 2 months ago and you do 1 million transactions a day, it's going to be painful to come back from, and so there may be a conversation around it. But if you're backing up multiple times a day and we're talking a couple of hours of lost transactions, okay, that's we can get past that, and so that may make that decision a lot easier. to be the individual in that decision. I feel for them. I have huge empathy, but they've got to look at, again, they made a decision early on. What's my risk, and am I willing to mitigate against it? And if they weren't, then it makes it a harder decision.
Yeah. My rule of thumb has always been moment in time, figure out where your risks are, figure out what you're going to accept, and then put a system in place. And then continually look back and progress, and look back and progress. And then you never can see, you need people, right?
Yep.
Like partners are great, but sometimes you need somebody that's intentionally thinking about this stuff day to day, that's got their mind and kind of they're wired that way, and they could be your advocate and liaison for those groups. So it would be crazy to be 2023 and not say the letters AI, right? Because I feel like that's in every discussion anymore. Like what do you see in terms of like AI, and what I'm going to say opportunities, because I feel like there's so much speculation, the bad things that come along with AI, but I think there's also some positive things that I think for small to mid-sized companies that will actually help them with some of this stuff. What excites you a little bit about for small to mid-sized businesses and your work that you do about AI?
Yeah, I mean, AI is not going to take over and put everyone out of work, and I mean, we've had in history transitions in workforce, and I think AI can be a powerful tool. I think right now AI kind of like even cyber gets overused sometimes, and people don't always know exactly what it means and what all it includes. Manufacturing, I see huge potential for AI. We're already seeing it in some of the tools that we utilize. Like Sentinel-1 and some of the EDRs, the MDRs have a component of AI built in. There's got to be a centralization of the information collected and to really put out some stuff. But I've played around with not so much Bard, but ChatGPT, and I see let's take it away from the tech side and say, like sales and marketing, I see a huge opportunity for AI to help with content. And if I'm a content writer, I'm concerned. I think there's still proofing that needs to be done. I've seen some false things put out, but I've also seen some really amazing outputs based on really strong inputs. So you need the right people asking the right questions for AI to work properly. And it's going to continue to affect the tech space 100%. And we're going to see it in probably every tool on the market. And it's going to be utilized to assist with cybersecurity. But all this stuff takes time. I don't see it as this scary thing that's again just going to take over the world. But for right now, it's doing what it needs to.
It's not the boogeyman.
No.
I read an article earlier this week that it was somebody was predicting that AI was the next .com boom bust, around like it was just going to be this flash in a pan. And I don't agree with that. I mean, I think there will be I'm sure it will cool off to some extent, but I agree with you. I think it's going to be something that's becoming just embedded into all the software and tools that we use, because everybody likes the convenience. Everybody loves the ease in which it does things, right? Because we're all inherently lazy. I'll be the first to admit, right? Like, of course, who doesn't want to be able to click a button and get the thing that you want in 4.5 seconds, right? Like, creating policies, right? Going in there, right? Create a cybersecurity policy aligned to the NICE framework for XYZ manufacturing plant. And it's going to give you a version of that, right? It's not going to be perfect, and it's probably going to need some tweaking and coaching, but crap, getting you to an 80% solution in 4.5 seconds versus an 80% solution over the course of months, like that's not a bad thing. And then you're there quicker, and people can work more efficiently. So I know I'm excited about it. It's I don't think it takes away. I don't think it holistically take away jobs. They minimize some of the stuff, but I've also seen groups like Jobs for the Future be very proactive in this and say, this is the future. 75 years from now, we want to make sure that people have access to these types of jobs that support AI, right? So like, it's not, we got to get out of the thinking it's bad. Is how do we prepare the rest of the world to be equipped with the skills they need to take those types of jobs, right? The working is just changing for everybody. So
it's enhancing, right? And I think that's the thing. It's just like automation. Everyone gets concerned with automation. And honestly, automation is doing the repetitive stuff that most people are bored out of their minds doing. So, there are positives that come out of that. And I think AI is going to have that same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So last question, it's always important, right? Is, what advice would you give to folks, that are looking to level up their cybersecurity career? In this sense, maybe your cybersecurity posture for your company.
Yeah. So I think if you're internal somewhere and it's all about education. I think that there's someone I know that once has said multiple times, education is the portal of prosperity. So I think continued education around it, and then just engagement and networking, right? So Tony, you and I met years ago via networking, and I think that's the biggest piece here. Is there's a lot of organizations. There's a huge shortage when it comes to cybersecurity professionals. So being able to engage and network and understand what the potential is. Tony's organization, CyberUp, has done an absolutely amazing job with helping level people up. So I think that's that education component. And so networking with other professionals, and really trying to understand what's important, what a business really wants and what's concerned with, because what it is today and what we see in tech is how quick things move. So what's needed today may not be what's needed directly tomorrow, and so you've got to be able to be flexible with that. So that engagement and that networking will help you understand it.
So you didn't pay me to say this, but ATB, and I think just the use of an organization like ATB is a game changer, especially for organizations that just really don't know where they want to start. Find yourself a good managed service provider. ATB is a great option if you're here in the state of Missouri and St. Louis. But it is such an important part of your portfolio. I wouldn't sleep on it any more than your marketing and your other stuff, right? Where you're worried about sales and driving it. This is an integral part of your business, and think about the impact that having down systems and down technology has for the overall health and wellness, right? Like, oh no, a social media post doesn't go out, that's really a small risk compared to like, oh my gosh, we've had our entire system and network hacked, right? Like, a bad social media post, you might get some dings, network down, you're losing money. So there's a good thing there. So, Chris, I appreciate it. 33 minutes goes quick. I encourage everybody to join us next week. We're going to have our friend Joe Blanchard, another long-term friend of just CyberUp as a whole. And we're going to dive into, right, we got into the kind of the basics of where you want to start for small business. Next week, we're going to talk about tools and software and things that you can purchase. There's so many billions upon billions of dollars in this industry that has gone to making the next best tool that's going to solve all your problems. And that doesn't exist, by the way, but the tools and things you use are important. And Joe does a great job of kind of laying out, in different specific areas that are important to everybody, whether it's AI or multi-factor and those. So a lot of good options. So excited about that discussion. So as always, Chris, appreciate it.
Thanks,
everybody tuning in. Thank you so much. And until next week, have a good one.